Chapter 1. The Blessed Express. 13 years, 35 professional fights, 0 quit. Max Blessed Holloway isn't just a fighter. He's the BMF. We just watched him finally settle the score with a retiring Dustin Poirier. And now he's heading into a rematch 11 years in the making against Charles Oliveira at UFC 326. But to understand why Max is a fan favourite, my personal favourite, and one of the greatest to ever do it, you have to see his journey. The highs, the iconic moments, the legendary win streaks, and the moments that nearly broke him. Chapter 2. The Skinny Kid. Max started fighting early. After 1 amateur fight and 4 pro wins in Hawaii, he became the youngest fighter on the UFC roster at just 20 years old. His welcome to the UFC, Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Imagine having to fight Dustin Poirier on your first ever pro fight. Fuck that. For the first 2 minutes, it was actually a competitive fight on the feet, but the experience gap showed the second Dustin managed to take Max down. Dustin secured a double leg takedown, moved to mount, and submitted Max with a nasty mounted triangle armbar combo. There's no shame in losing your debut to a future legend, and Max proved that he belonged by bouncing back with a 3-fight win streak with wins against Pat Chilling, Justin Lawrence, and Leonard Garcia. But then Max hit a wall. First, a split decision loss to Dennis Bermudez, followed by a high-profile, unanimous decision loss with a rising Conor McGregor. On the feet, the fight was relatively competitive. Now don't get me wrong, Conor was winning the exchanges, but it was close. McGregor actually ended up taking Max down, and I believe it was because he looked more comfortable having Max on the ground rather than trading with him on the feet. At this point, McGregor was on a literal rampage. He was knocking people out left, right and centre, but he couldn't knock out Max Holloway. Max dragged the notorious one to his first ever career decision. In hindsight, we should have known we had a legend on our hands. By age 21, Max had competed in 2 competitive fights with 2 of the greatest fighters of his generation. On paper, at the end of 2013, Max was 3-3 in the UFC. Most people saw an average fighter, but Max knew he was not average. He knew he was an elite fighter and he was about to show the world. Chapter 3. The Untouchable Streak. After the McGregor loss, something in Max Holloway just clicked. He didn't want to win. He wanted to drown people. He started a rampage that would last for the next 5 years, starting with a clinical knockout of Will Cho. He started stacking dubs like me in the prime Warzone era, and trust me, that was a lot of dubs. It didn't matter who they put in front of this guy, but in 2015 he met a future fan favourite, Charles Oliveira. This is the fight that hangs over both men still to this day. It was supposed to be a classic, but it ended in under 2 minutes with Charles suffering a freak injury to his esophagus. Max got the win, but it was anticlimactic. It left a big question in all fans' minds, all over the world. What would happen in a fight between Charles and Max that didn't end in a freak injury? That question has followed both men for over a decade, and next weekend they finally get to put their improved skill sets on the line to answer that question. Max didn't let the weird ending to his previous fight slow him down. He went out and beat Jeremy Stephens by unanimous decision, and then faced Ricardo Lamas at UFC 199. This is the moment where Max Holloway became a legend and became my personal favourite fighter. Most fighters, when winning, take opponents down and hold them there to not risk losing the fight. Max was winning the fight clearly. He had 0 reason to take a risk. But with 10 seconds on the clock, Max did the unthinkable. He pointed at the centre of the canvas, planted his feet, and gifted Ricardo Lamas one last opportunity to use the last 10 seconds of the fight to stand and bang. The crowd went crazy and both men swung heavy shots for the remainder of the fight. Max never took a single backstep. He won the final exchange, he won the fight, and he won the respect of so many UFC fans all over the world. It was pure, unadulterated madness. Max wasn't just a prospect anymore. He was a problem for the whole UFC. He had 9 wins in a row, and he was coming for the UFC featherweight belt. Chapter 4. The King of Featherweights. By late 2016, the UFC had no choice. They booked Max Holloway against Anthony Pettis for the interim featherweight title. Now, Pettis was a former champ, an MMA superstar who was loved by the fans, and Max absolutely dismantled him. He became the first man to ever stop Pettis, doing so with a body kick, followed by a nasty combination. And finally, Max had UFC gold wrapped around his waist. As Max Holloway iconically says, to be the best, you've got to beat the best. And at this moment in Max's story, the best is the undisputed king, the greatest featherweight to ever live, Jose Aldo. At UFC 212, Max flew halfway across the world to Rio de Janeiro, Jose Aldo's backyard. The atmosphere was hostile, but Max didn't care. He weathered the storm early and finished Aldo in the third round. And to prove it wasn't just a fluke, he did it again 6 months later. 2 fights against the featherweight GOAT, 2 dominant third round finishes. The blessed era was officially in full swing. He followed that up by facing the undefeated submission specialist Brian Ortega. This fight wasn't just a win, it was a masterclass. Max landed nearly 300 significant strikes. At one point, he absolutely violated Brian Ortega by taking a break from repeatedly hitting him to show him how to properly block a punch. It was like a professional boxer sparring with an amateur. At this point, Max Holloway looked untouchable. He was the king of featherweights, and it felt like the reign would never end. Chapter 5, the best boxer in UFC, baby. After the Brian Ortega masterclass, Max decided it was time to chase champ status. He moved up to lightweight to face an old competitor, Dustin Poirier. This was a 25-minute war. Max had the volume, but Dustin had the power of a semi-truck. Max showed he had the chin of a god, but the dream of 2 belts died that night in a bloody decision loss. Max didn't moan or sulk about his loss. He went straight back down to featherweight to defend his throne against the literal legend, Frankie Edgar. Now, if you're a newer fan, you might not realise how big this was. Frankie Edgar was the original cardio king. He was the blueprint for what Max became. For years, this was the dream fight that kept falling through. But when they finally met at UFC 240, Max proved there was levels to this game. He outworked the hardest worker in the room, winning every single round to get a unanimous decision win, defending his UFC featherweight title. It was the perfect title defense. Max was back on top of the world, but little did we know, a storm was brewing in Australia that was about to change everything. His name was Alexander Volkanovski. At UFC 245, Max lost his belt in a tactical battle, but it was the rematch at UFC 251 that still keeps MMA fans up at night. I'm going to say it, Max won that fight. He absolutely won that fight. He dropped Volk twice, he was in total control, but the judges didn't see it that way. They saw something different. It was one of the most debated robberies in the history of the sport, and I still think to this day that the judges got this one wrong. Max was no longer the champ, but he still had a lot to give to the sport and to the fans. He stepped back into the cage with Calvin Kattar and produced, in my opinion, the greatest striking clinic ever seen in the octagon. 445 significant strikes. At one point, he was looking at the commentary booth, screaming, "I'm the best boxer in the UFC," whilst dodging punches and not even looking at Calvin Kattar. Keep in mind, going into this fight, people were talking about Calvin Kattar having some of the best boxing skills in the UFC, and Max made him look like he didn't even belong in the UFC. He followed that up with a 5-round war against Yair Rodriguez, proving that even without the belt, the Blessed Express was still one of the most dangerous featherweights in the UFC. Max had shown that no matter how many times he gets knocked down, he will always get back up. He did that with the 2 wins we just mentioned, and that was enough to earn him a 3rd chance to beat the undisputed champ, Alexander Volkanovski. Then the UFC decided to play a funny joke. They released a funny AI-generated video of Volkanovski absolutely battering Max Holloway and beating him 5 rounds to 0. It wasn't AI, bro. Yeah, sure, man, it was an AI. Yeah, sure. Nah, all jokes aside, Volk absolutely dominated Max in this fight. 50-45, unanimous. Everyone upset about the result in fight 2 had nothing to say now, me included. This is what, in my opinion, makes this guy so fucking amazing. No matter what happens, he doesn't know when to quit. Volk made him look average in that fight. Everyone thought this was the start of Max Holloway's decline. But if you've followed his career so far, you should know the Blessed Express doesn't stop when things get tough. It keeps going forward, and that's what it did. After this fight, he went on to beat Arnold Allen by decision and knocked the Korean Zombie out cold in his retirement fight. Sure, Max had been beaten badly by Volk, But after these amazing performances, Max blessed Holloway was back. Chapter 6, the BMF. That brings us to UFC 300. Max fought Justin Gaethje with the BMF belt on the line. Everyone said that Max was too small. They said that Justin would break his chin. Instead, Max put on a masterclass for 24 minutes and 50 seconds, beating and battering Justin at every opportunity. He made Justin look like he didn't even belong in there with him. And then, with 10 seconds left, we got the point down 2.0. In a fight, Max was already winning and dominating. He planted his feet and traded fire until he put down the most scariest, violent man face first on the canvas with 1 second left. Unarguably, nobody mentioned this in the comments, this is the greatest knockout in UFC history. And if you disagree, you're just wrong. But unfortunately, the high didn't last forever. The UFC released another AI video of Max Holloway losing. UFC, please make some different AI videos. Stop making AI videos of my GOAT getting KO'd. Please stop. Nah, in all seriousness, at UFC 308, Max faced the new king of the featherweights, Poirier. In 35 professional fights, Max had never been knocked out before, but Poirier did the unthinkable. He found the button. Seeing Max on the canvas for the first time was a shock to the system for the entire MMA world. People said the Justin Gaethje war had finally taken Max's chin. They said it was all over, but you should know by now Max Holloway is built different.
I'm built different.
Instead of fading away, he stepped back into the fire for the ultimate grudge match. Dustin Poirier vs Max Holloway 3, July 2025. Isn't that poetic? Dustin was Max's first ever fight in the UFC, and Max was Dustin's last. 13 years after Dustin submitted that 20-year-old kid in his debut, Max finally got his revenge. He outclassed the Diamond for 5 rounds, defended his BMF title, and shared a final embrace with his greatest rival as Dustin retired. He proved that no matter how many times he gets knocked down, he always gets back up. He proved that even after the highest highs and the lowest lows, he is still the baddest motherfucker on the planet. Chapter 7, settling the score with Charles do Bronx Oliveira. And that leads us to right now. Next weekend, March 7th, 2026, UFC 326. Max Holloway is stepping back into the octagon for a rematch that has been 11 years in the making against Charles Oliveira. Since that weird injury in 2015, both men have become absolute legends of the sport. Charles became the most dangerous submission artist in UFC history, and Max has become one of the best strikers in the sport. This isn't just a fight for a ranking. This is about settling the final 11-year-old question of who really wins this fight. Max is my favourite fighter because he represents the best parts of the sport. He doesn't wait for the perfect matchup, he doesn't protect his record, and he doesn't know how to take a backstep for the life of him. But most importantly, he's just a cool dude. Whether he's pointing at the floor or showing his opponent how to block, Max Holloway is one of one. What do you guys think is going to happen in this fight? Does Max keep the BMF belt and settle the score with Charles? Or does Charles find a way to stop the Blessed Express? Let me know in the comments, and while you're down there, also let me know what you think about this video and also what I can improve. I've wanted to do this for years. I've been wanting to start a YouTube channel since I was a little kid, but I've always had a fear of being judged or people thinking I'm cringe. But fuck that. I love this sport and I'm going to keep telling these stories. If you're still here, I appreciate the sport so much. If you want a video on a certain fighter, let me know in the comments. Hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next videos, which, by the way, are going to be documentaries on Luke Riley and Shamrock, 2 fighters on the rise in the UFC from my city who are both due to fight soon. Peace.